there are few issues that bring out as many people and as much emotion as the death penalty, and of course that's for good reason. Once again this week, crowds lined up, testimony continued well into the night as advocates and opponents shared their concerns with the Judiciary Committee. Representative Gary Holder Winfield is here now to talk about that marathon hearing and the passionate pleas that you heard.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I guess we could just start off right at the top with why you think repeal is the right thing for Connecticut.
I think the death penalty is bad public policy. We have the ability to immobilize people, to make sure they never commit the heinous crimes, admittedly, both sides, I think, both sides will admit to. And we don't have to execute people in order to do that. So why we have to take that extra step, I don't know. No one has actually been able to really articulate the real reason why we should do that, other than we should do it. And so since I've entered the General Assembly, I've endeavored to abolish the death penalty.
What are the most compelling arguments that you do hear from the other side? Because I imagine, obviously it's a very emotional issue and people come and wear their emotions on their sleeves as they're talking about it.
You know, the things that move the General Assembly, I think, are arguments from people who are the surviving family members. Other than that, most of the arguments I don't think really move the General Assembly. The argument about deterrence, I think, has largely been refuted. And if you go down the line of most of the arguments made, from my perspective, I think they don't hold as much water as a Dr. Pettit or someone like that.
What about the argument that having it on the books gives prosecutors a tool to bargain with defendants and get them to turn on other people or give evidence? Or
well, I will say a couple of things to that. One, I was always under the impression, because it had been told to me that that's what happened. Yet in the hearing that we just had, State's Attorney Kane said that they don't use it in that manner. And I'm actually happy to hear that, because while we may use it in other criminal cases, I think to use the death penalty, which we are saying is justice, to plea bargain to some other penalty is wrong. And so I think that argument, since Attorney Kane has put that forward, is now off the table.
How about the push that I know it's been used in other states, albeit unsuccessfully, to kind of narrow down the use, saying, okay, well, we'll only use it for the most extreme cases?
Well, you know, Connecticut is a place where we have a very narrow death penalty. But again, from my perspective, the death penalty, using the death penalty at all is wrong. So I wouldn't be the person who would accept that argument. I just think we can't fix the death penalty because the death penalty itself is wrong.
Senator Kissel seemed to be adjusting to making some adjustments, I guess, in anticipation that it would be repealed, talking about perhaps whether the chief public defender would support more isolation or more segregation of death row inmates, or I guess what would be people who would be serving life sentences. Would you consider that kind of thing? Actually,
I think that's the wrong direction to go in. I think we've known for a long time that the harsher you treat prisoners, the more dangerous they become. So doing what sounds like a good idea just doesn't make a lot of sense. We had a person who had been a long-time employee in the correction system at the hearing talk about this. There are many studies that you can look at. And then people in the system know that treating people harshly just creates in those people hostility. We don't want to do that. And by the way, the majority of people who committed the heinous types of crime we're talking about are currently in prison, life without the possibility of release, in the same way that we're trying to prevent these people who are on death row. So if people wanted that to be the case, there are lawmakers who have the ability, just like I do, to put out a bill to do that. They've had that ability for a long time. It's curious to me that this comes as a response to the death penalty and not just because that's what we want to do.
I'm curious, though, and this is probably not a legal perspective that you can give, but how do you reconcile that with the emotions of people who are victims of crime or have been victims of crime, and their emotions about these prisoners, as they would see it, having more rights, being in the general population, having access to television. And again, it's probably not a legal perspective that you would offer, but how do you reconcile that with knowing that they resent that almost?
Well, I don't accept that. So you have some who do, and then you have some who don't. Just like you have some who want the death penalty and some who don't. Largely, the conversation has been that all as a monolith, that these families who we're talking about are monolithic, but they're not, which is the reason why we've endeavored to have those who are willing to come and speak about it, demonstrate to the public that this group isn't monolithic. And then when legislators are making these arguments, we need to be honest about what the reality is. And the reality is there's no group of people in Connecticut that fully believe we should have the death penalty, and there's no group that fully believe we should not have the death penalty.
Interesting. You know, a longtime opponent of the death penalty, Senator Andrew Rohrabaugh, has said this year that he would hold his vote unless changes were also made to the risk reduction program. And I'm wondering whether you think that will happen. Will it come up? Will there be changes? Would you support changes?
I don't support the policy he's putting forward. I think, again, to the point I just made, Senator Rohrabaugh has been in the legislature for quite a while. I think he's a good legislator. And if he intended to deal with that issue, he could have put forward a bill separate from the death penalty bill to deal with it. And also, listen, the policy has changed. It doesn't make a lot of sense to go backwards and then actually have probably the need to go through the courts because you've gone backwards and changed those sentences. So I understand that that's his perspective. I just think a good legislator understands how the process works and would have put forward the bill at the very beginning of the session.
You had told me that you think this might be the year that it goes all the way through. I think there's several reasons why that might be.
I'm optimistic. I came in 2009 thinking that we could do it then when almost nobody thought so. But to this year, I think there are a couple of people in the Senate. We know this issue, the issue really resides in the Senate. We believe that the House is very likely to pass the bill. So the issue's in the Senate. I think when listening to the testimony that happened at the public hearing, when listening to the victims' families who don't agree with the victim families who say we need the death penalty, I think legislators will see that this is not the situation we've always thought it was, and I think they will come to our side.
We only have about a minute left, so I'll take a prerogative here to switch topics and see what else you're the most concerned about in this session and what you're hoping to work on.
So education, you just talked about education. It's critical. Myself and the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, we have an education bill that's not been spoken about, but it's very important. It deals with the issue of universal reading, which is right at the heart of the achievement gap. And it deals with how do we do this by the third grade. And if students don't read by the third grade, what policy we have in place to make sure that this happens. So my focus largely has been on education. It's just that the death penalty rises to the top.
So that, you know, I meant to ask them in the last segment, but all of their efforts are tied, right, to the No Child Left Behind, to trying to get a waiver to that.
There is the effort to get a waiver to No Child Left Behind to allow some freedoms that currently don't exist.
Right. You optimistic about the education reform plan being put through, passed?
I don't know what form it will take, but I'm pretty sure there will be a Senate Bill 24, and the universal reading bill I'm pretty sure will pass. So this is why those conversations that are being had are important, because whatever we do, there will be a Senate Bill 24, and so we have to make sure it's the right bill.
Right. Interesting. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Don't forget, if you missed something here on The Real Story, you can now watch it online by going to ctnow.com. You can also catch us on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching this week's edition of The Real Story. We'll see you here again next week.